Welcome to the Darwinian Delusions channel. Today's episode, what I want to cover is 5 alternatives to Darwinian evolution. Now, just to recap in case you haven't seen the other episodes on this channel, there's a clear difference between evolution and Darwinian evolution. Evolution is simply a fact, it's a simple observation of biological change over time, and this was known for hundreds of years before Darwin. Darwinian evolution is a particular history of evolution, starting with the first cell, branching out slowly into all of the species that we actually have today. And the driving force behind this is natural selection, working on variations, and later with neo-Darwinism, mutations, random mutations. Random mutations are the fodder from which you have this whole biodiversity, this whole engine working. Now, there are 5 fully fledged alternatives to neo-Darwinism or Darwinism, and I'm using these terms interchangeably even though there is a slight difference. Now, the first alternative is evolution by natural genetic engineering, and this has been proposed by evolutionary biologist James Shapiro. The second is neo-Lamarckian evolution, and this is a rehashed version of Lamarckian evolution, which is something which existed before Darwin. The third is Mendelian mutationism, also known as neo-mutationism, also known as mutation-driven evolution. And that's been proposed by Masayoshi Nai of Japan, and he's a big figure in population genetics. And the fourth alternative, and I think this one's really interesting, is symbiotic evolution. Now, this was proposed by Lynn Margulis, who's known for her end symbiotic theory, in which, this theory is taught all over the world. It shows the origin of eukaryotic cells from prokaryotes. And what she proposes is symbiosis leads to symbiogenesis, complete new novel systems. And she basically says that this is driven by the inheritance of acquired genomes. The whole genome is actually acquired. And lastly, evolution by self-organization. This is something which is proposed by Stuart Kauffman and also Stuart Newman, both evolutionary biologists. And what they basically propose is that natural selection is not the driving force of evolution, it's actually self-organization. Self-organization is an observable phenomena in physics, chemistry, biology, cognitive systems, and in, for example, fireflies. You have the synchronized way that the fireflies actually attract the opposite sex. So they propose that self-organization is the driving force of evolution. And self-organization, in a nutshell, is that you can have complexity arising from local interactions. It's quite a simple idea, and the way that crystals form, their formation is explained using self-organization. It's actually quite a novel idea. Now, we have these 5 fully fledged alternatives, and the thing to note about these alternatives is these are alternatives in terms of the mechanism of evolution. They're a challenge to Darwin's mechanism. They necessarily aren't a challenge to the tree of life, the history of life. I mean, some of the people who support some of the alternative mechanisms, such as Carl Woese, who discovered the third domain of life. We have bacteria, we have eukarya, and we have archaea, which is something that he discovered. Now, he's an atheist, he's an evolutionary biologist, and he didn't believe neo-Darwinism in its current format is basically a viable option. He believed it needs to be changed. Now, he believes in the web of life, and he believes in evolution by natural genetic engineering. But nonetheless, all of these alternatives do actually, you can fit them in within the tree of life in some way, although there's some problems, some conceptual problems, because it's absolutely necessary from a Darwinian perspective to have gradualism, and some of these alternatives, they definitely don't have gradualism. So how you rectify that, I mean, that's just for biologists to work out. But what's really interesting is there's so much hostility to these alternatives. And I was trying to understand why, because they're all naturalistic. In some cases, they explain the data better then, and in fact not better, they explain it in some cases where Darwinism has nothing to say. Darwinism has basically, you can say, is signing blank checks. It doesn't even have a startup when it comes to some evolutionary problems. And this is something even acknowledged by Mutation-Driven Evolution, the book, which is published by Oxford University. Even on their website, when they have a description of the book, they admit that there's some things where there's difficulties for Darwinism, and mutation-driven evolution is solving those. Now, why are Darwinists so upset when you speak about these 5 alternatives? And the reason is because although these alternatives are naturalistic, these alternatives aren't anti-theistic. Okay, so Darwin's theory of evolution, you have to understand, it gives atheists a sort of reassurance. It gives them this sort of hope that this world looks kind of designed. There's a lot of amazing design. I mean, just the other day I was talking to an anatomist, and he told me, sorry, he's not an anatomist, he studied anatomy, he's a doctor, but while he was studying anatomy and he had to do dissections and he had to do all these sort of things, he was telling me some amazing things to do with the human body. Like, we have blood vessels all over our body, and these blood vessels are sealed, but when the blood vessels when they go through our brain, there is actually a part where there is the blood-brain barrier and is actually broken, and you do actually have some blood which comes out of the tube, and it's actually tested by the brain for toxins. Now that's amazing. It's like a fail-safe, right? And the body reacts if there is some sort of toxins in the blood. Now the body is absolutely amazing if you think about it. We have 40 trillion bacteria, and we need them for our metabolism, we need them for our nutrition, we need them for our digestion. We would die without them. And it's absolutely phenomenal if you look at just the design of the human body. Of course, Darwinists would agree it's design, but they would say it's an illusion of design. Natural selection is a blind watchmaker. Now the problem is, Darwinism doesn't like, and Darwinists don't like the other alternatives, because the other alternatives, they're quite, the proponents of all of those alternatives are actually atheists, but you can still have a lot of theological insight, and you can still make some extrapolations, and it's not anti-theistic from those perspectives, those alternatives. But Darwinism is all of design is actually an illusion. And also, one of the reasons why Darwinists get very upset is because, as Richard Dawkins says, before Darwin, atheism may have been logically tenable, but Darwin allowed us to be intellectually satisfied atheists. And it has become into a fully fledged religion, as Michael Roos, in his book Darwinism as Religion, published by Oxford University, he's an atheist, he makes this case, he's a philosopher of science, that it has become into a fully fledged religion. And it's also become into a political system and an ethical system. And because of this pressure, it's very difficult for Darwinists to actually admit, actually, no, Darwinism's wrong and we can go with one of the alternatives. Because if you go with one of the alternatives, you could still claim things like human-chimp ancestry and, the tree of life. You can maybe try and fit that in somewhere. But the reason why they don't want to do it is because, they're trying to save face, because they're going to be shown to be overstepping the evidence for the last 150 years, claiming that this is absolutely true. And it's a fully fledged religion, and they have a religious bias. And often I hear the claim, well, why don't you find atheist biologists who disagree with Darwinism? And, I find them, and then I show their examples on this channel. And I've even uploaded Dennis Noble's video on here, who's an Oxford University evolutionary biologist, who is an atheist, who's against Darwinism. But nonetheless, shouldn't the question actually be, find me God-fearing biologists who do believe in Darwinism? If we switch it over, why do they add a caveat that you have to find somebody who's an atheist and they disagree with Darwinian evolution? That doesn't make any sense, because Darwinian evolution fits hand in glove with atheism. So it's as if they're asking us, oh, we don't accept these people because there's confirmation bias, but the people that they're proposing us to find, which is atheist biologists who disagree, atheist evolutionary biologists who disagree with Darwinism, it's the same thing. It's literally the same thing, because atheism fits hand in glove with Darwinism, as admitted by Darwinists themselves, like Michael Roos, like Richard Dawkins. So I hope you've learnt from this episode. There are 5 alternatives that do exist, and these 5 alternatives are fully fledged, functioning, scientifically valid alternatives, just like Darwinism is also scientifically valid. And there is a discussion going on. There are actually disputes about Darwinism's most fundamental ideas. For more videos about why Darwinism is speculative based on assumptions and the disputes that exist amongst evolutionary biologists about its most fundamental ideas, make sure you subscribe.